All right, welcome. Today we are going to dive into a single, insane battle that didn't just end a war. Oh no. It flipped the entire world order upside down and pretty much set the stage for the rest of the 20th century.
So, let's just jump right in with a question that gets to the absolute heart of this story. And this isn't some hypothetical what-if scenario. This was the real, honest-to-goodness disaster the Russian Empire found itself in, and it led to, well, maybe the most lopsided butt-kicking in the history of warfare.
But to really get how this all went down, we gotta rewind a bit. We're heading back to the turn of the 20th century, where two very, very different empires were steaming right towards each other, all because they wanted the same piece of land.
Okay, so on one side, you've got this absolute beast, Imperial Russia. I mean, they were huge, powerful, and totally convinced that European powers were just better than everyone else. And on the other side, you've got Meiji Japan, a nation that had gone from samurai and swords to smokestacks and steel in just a few decades. Both of them had their eyes on the prize, a warm water port called Port Arthur. For Japan, this was their big chance to finally get a seat at the Cool Kids Colonizer Club.
And this right here, this quote, this tells you everything you need to know about the Tsar's attitude. He had this incredibly dismissive, racist view of the Japanese. So much so that when their diplomats literally came all the way to St. Petersburg to try and work things out peacefully, he couldn't even be bothered to show up to the meeting.
So Japan felt like they had their back against the wall. They'd been ignored, insulted, and now they were strategically threatened. So they did what they felt they had to do. Under the command of the brilliant Admiral Togo, they hit first, kicking off the Russo-Japanese War and sending absolute shockwaves across a world that just assumed this would be an easy win for Russia.
With its Pacific fleet now totally bottled up and taking a beating, Russia made a decision that was, well, it was desperate and honestly kinda nuts. They decided they were going to send their other fleet, the Baltic Fleet, halfway around the globe to save the day.
18,000 miles. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how far this fleet, which they renamed the 2nd Pacific Squadron, had to sail. And the poor guy in charge of this impossible trip was Admiral Rajestvenski. Now, he was a good commander, for sure, but he was about to run into a problem that no amount of naval genius could solve.
And here it is. Here's the Admiral's biggest nightmare. His crew was completely, totally green. These weren't hardened sea dogs. Nope, these were farmers, factory workers, guys who were conscripted and, for many of them, had never even seen the ocean before, let alone sailed on a warship. And boy, did it show.
You know, the 8-month journey was basically a blooper reel. It was a nonstop comedy of errors. They almost started a war with Great Britain when they attacked a bunch of innocent fishing boats in the North Sea, thinking they were Japanese torpedo boats. In the panic, they started shooting at their own ships. And then there was this one ship, the Kamchatka, which kept sending frantic radio messages that it was being attacked, all the way down the coast of Africa. There were no Japanese ships for thousands of miles.
But here's the craziest part. Against all odds, they made it. After 8 months of sheer, unadulterated chaos, the most unprepared fleet in naval history was now steaming towards its destiny, about to face off against one of the greatest naval minds of all time. The stage was set for an epic showdown.
Admiral Rajestvenski, probably exhausted and just wanting to get this whole thing over with, decided to take the most direct route he could to the Russian port of Vladivostok, and that meant sailing straight through the Tsushima Strait. Well, wouldn't you know it, this was exactly what the Japanese Admiral Togo was hoping for. The trap was sprung.
As the two massive fleets finally laid eyes on each other, Admiral Togo had this legendary signal hoisted up the mast. I mean, talk about raising the stakes. He was telling his men, "This is it. Our entire nation's future is riding on what we do today. Don't mess it up."
So Togo sees the Russians coming at him in one long, clumsy line. And he pulls off this incredibly risky, but absolutely brilliant, textbook naval maneuver called crossing the T. Okay, picture this. The Russian fleet is the long, vertical part of the letter T. Togo swings his fleet around to become the horizontal bar on top. What does that mean? It means every single one of his ships can fire all of their main guns at the front of the Russian line, while the Russians, they can only shoot back with the few guns they have pointing forward. It's a huge advantage.
And it was devastating. An absolute masterstroke. The Japanese crews were better trained, their guns were more modern, they could fire faster. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Within just 30 minutes, the lead Russian battleships were just smoking, sinking heaps of metal.
Just look at these numbers. They're staggering. Russia lost 21 ships, with another 7 captured. They lost over 10,000 men, either killed or captured. And Japan? They lost 3 small torpedo boats, not a single major ship. This wasn't a defeat for Russia, it was total, complete, and utter annihilation.
The guns finally fell silent in the Tsushima Strait, but the shockwaves from this one battle were just getting started. They were about to ripple across the entire globe and change history forever.
So what happened next? Well, first, it ended the war. The Tsar had no fleet left, so he had to sue for peace. But it was so much bigger than that. This was the first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a major European power. It shattered the myth of European invincibility. Back in Russia, the humiliating loss helped fuel the anger that would eventually boil over into the Russian Revolution. And for Japan, this was their grand entrance. They were now a world power.
But wait, there's a twist in the tale. The peace treaty was mediated by the U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt. And in the negotiations, he persuaded Russia that they shouldn't have to pay Japan any money for the war. So Japan, after nearly bankrupting its entire country to win this incredible victory, got nothing, not a dime. And they felt completely and utterly cheated by the West.
And that brings us to our final chilling thought. That feeling of being cheated, that resentment, it didn't just go away. It festered. It grew for decades into a deep-seated animosity, especially towards the United States. It planted a seed that would eventually bloom into another surprise attack on another naval fleet almost 40 years later, at a place called Pearl Harbor. The echoes of Tsushima were so much longer and so much louder than anyone at the time could have ever possibly imagined.